بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. السادة الحضور، نرحب بكم ابتداء وننوه على أن هذه الندوة يمكن سماعها مترجمة باللغة العربية على القناة المصاحبة، والتي يمكن الدخول عليها بالضغط على الأيقونة الموجودة في أسفل الشاشة وعليها رمز الكرة الأرضية. Ladies and gentlemen, our honorable speaker, we welcome you all to one of Naseej Academy's webinars that aim to share knowledge, ideas, and new trends in the field of learning and knowledge management. This webinar comes at the right time, as the region faces a momentum of focusing on moving to digital transformation, whether by launching a national strategy for digital transformation or through establishing different projects that utilizing both knowledge management and big data in facilitating executing digital transformation plans, especially during and after COVID-19. Also, it comes at the right time to be aligned with launching the new vision for Naseej, which gives the unique value proposition to Naseej. This vision is harnessing the power of digital transformation in learning and knowledge management, which I prefer to give here the approved Arabic translation of it with all my thanks and appreciation for our translator. It will be تمكين التحول الرقمي في إدارة التعلم والمعرفة. Our webinar tonight entitled Knowledge Management and Digital Transformation, and we are pleased to have our honored speaker to run it, Mr. Scott Lee, Engagement Director, Senior Consultant, and Knowledge Management Subject Matter Expert at I Know Company. Mr. Scott created and ran the global knowledge function at 4 Fortune 500 companies and a leading international philosophy. He worked with government organizations in Saudi Arabia and other GCC countries to build their knowledge capabilities. Previously, Mr. Scott worked in the government, private sector, and non-for-profit spaces. One more announcement before I leave the virtual floor to Mr. Scott. As we used to do in the Naseej Academy webinar, we welcome and to receive all questions and queries at the end of the presentation to be written in the Q&A box, whether in Arabic or in English. مرة أخرى أنوه أن الندوة يمكن سماعها مترجمة باللغة العربية على القناة المصاحبة. And now, please, Scott, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Abdallah. Good evening, everybody. Salam alaikum. Thank you for being on the call this evening. And thank you to the Naseej Academy for inviting me to speak on this important topic of knowledge management and digital transformation. As Dr. Abdallah said, my name is Scott Lieb, and I have been involved in knowledge management activities for the past 25 years in various industries. And it's through this lens which I will talk to you today about knowledge management and the digital transformation. As Dr. Abdallah said, please, I will speak for about an hour or so, and then I want to open the floor to questions. So please put your questions in the chat box or the Q&A box. My plan, again, as he said, is to answer those questions at the end. But if there is a question that comes up that I think is best answered in context, I will address it during my comments. So before talking about knowledge management and digital transformation, I think it's important that we set the timeline for the digital age. The digital age really began in 2002. This was the first year that digital information in the world exceeded that of analog information. And obviously, as we all know, how quickly digital information has been growing to the point now where it represents 99.9% plus of all information that's out there. So a lot has occurred in this digital age these past 20 years. There's three key events I think that are worth noting. The first is around 2010, 2011, the introduction of the idea of big data. Now, many of you have heard me speak before on the topic of big data, and there's multiple definitions and multiple ways to work and interpret big data. But for the purposes of this discussion, what I'd like to do is focus on the definition of big data is simply structured and unstructured data that is so big that traditional tools, traditional databases can't address the data. So the idea is that since 2011, with this the introduction of big data, we've needed new tools, new processes, and new techniques. And this has had a very important and profound impact on knowledge management. The next big event was 2016. The term Fourth Industrial Revolution was coined by Klaus Schwab. Klaus Schwab is the founder of the World Economic Forum. And in fact, he made this idea of the Fourth Industrial Revolution the key point of the key theme of the World Economic Forum. So what is the Fourth Industrial Revolution? Well, it is the idea that it's the ongoing evolution of traditional management and industrial practices that have been accelerated by automation. It's a mixing of the software, hardware, and the physical world that's been aided by changes in connectivity and communications. So it's really about the evolution of automation and robots and computers getting closer and closer and doing more and more human-like activities. So let me give an example of an example that illustrates the power and the technology of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. In June of 2020, a friend of mine and his friend wanted to take a trip cross-country in the United States, going from New York to California, about a 3,000-mile drive. And they wanted to stop off in cities and national parks and see many of the sites. But they couldn't do this because of COVID-19. But what they were able to do was take a virtual trip cross-country. They were able, using Google Maps, to follow the exact path, the exact roads they had wanted to, and simulate driving along those roads. And through communication, they were able to talk with one another as if they were in the same car. And as they drove along the roads, they could turn off and see sights. They could come to cities. They could go into museums and take virtual tours. And while they took these virtual tours that were led by tour guides, they were able to interact with other people taking tours. So they were able to meet people along their journey. And so this is a perfect example, I think, of linking the virtual world with the physical world. They were able to simulate their trip cross-country. And so I think that is a good example of showing some of the technologies of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And then finally, COVID-19. It goes without saying that COVID-19 has fundamentally transformed our personal lives as well as our professional lives. And I'm going to give a case study talking about how COVID-19 has impacted knowledge management. So for the presentation today, I will look through the lens of the past 20 years and the changes taking place and talk about this digital transformation. So there's 4 topics that I'd like to cover today. The first is, simply what is knowledge management? How should we think about knowledge management and treat knowledge management? Next, I want to talk about what I consider the 12 key challenges that knowledge management professionals face today. Then a COVID-19 case study. As I mentioned, COVID-19 has fundamentally altered our personal lives, but as KM professionals, it has had a profound impact on us as well. And I might even go so far as to say is COVID-19 has been beneficial for knowledge management because it has put us in the spotlight in certain key areas and allowed us to make greater impact in the organizations in which we work. And then finally, I wanted to provide a roadmap looking at 2022 and beyond. This is for you, ideas that you can take back to your organization that will allow them to not only survive, but really thrive in this digital era, in this era where transformation is taking place so very rapidly. So let me begin with speaking about what is knowledge management. As I mentioned, I have been involved in knowledge management for about 25 years, and I have seen all the textbook definitions of knowledge management, but I like to make it simple and simply say that knowledge management is about getting the right intelligence to the right person at the right time so they can make the right decision or provide the right advice. And there's a few key points here. The right intelligence. Notice I didn't say getting the right data or the right information. And I'll talk about what the difference is between data, information, intelligence, and knowledge in a moment. But it's about getting the right intelligence to make the right decision. Knowledge management is about providing valuable decision support intelligence. So for example, passing along the data point of 37 million and making that available to the organization doesn't serve much purpose. But putting it in the context of 37 million is an acquisition price for a potential company. Now you have something that you can make a decision with. The strategy department can look at that and say, we want to make that acquisition. We want to offer $30 million, or we don't want to make that acquisition, but you have the decision support information. And that's really what knowledge management is about. The other piece that's extremely important is getting the right intelligence at the right time. It's about just-in-time intelligence, because you could have all the intelligence, all the knowledge in the world, but if you don't have it when you need it, it serves no purpose. So let me give an example. When I first started work a number of years ago, I received training on all the Microsoft productivity tools. Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, Microsoft PowerPoint, Microsoft Outlook. And I remember as I was learning Excel, I said, well, this is sort of for the finance guys. I'm not going to need this. And for the first 6 months of my work, I never used it. But then one day, my boss came to me and said, I need you to look at these numbers and do some analysis. And I think it's best if we put it in a pivot table. And I sort of scratched my head and said, oh, that's right. I learned about pivot tables about 6 months ago. But I was able to call up that information. But if I hadn't been able to call that up, that just-in-time intelligence, and pull that data, pull that information when I needed it, it would have been of no value. So a big part of knowledge management is managing the knowledge, but making sure that the right people at the right time receive it. So this is my broad definition for what knowledge management is. And I mentioned briefly before the idea of data, information, intelligence, and knowledge. So let me try and put it all together here in what I call the knowledge pyramid. For many of you on this call, you were invited by Naseej or heard from Naseej that there was a presentation taking place, and the data you had was November 24th, 7:30 p.m., an hour and a half. Topic, knowledge management and digital transformation. That's all data points. But then you would find out you were passed on further data that allowed you to organize it and begin to interpret it. You found out what the topic was and what some of the issues covered were. You might have seen my bio. And now with that data and information, you now have intelligence because you can make, it's actionable. You can make a decision. If you just knew the date and time, you couldn't really make a decision. Now you can make a decision. You know that I'm the speaker. You know that I have 20 plus years experience. You know what the topic is, and you can choose then to make a decision to attend or not attend. And so that's the difference between data is just the facts. Information is the facts that are beginning to be organized. And then intelligence is the facts in a format where you can actually make a decision. And then from that, at the top of the pyramid, what we have is intelligence, or what we have is knowledge, rather, which is the experience of intelligence. You might have heard me speak on this topic before. Your experience tells you that this is worth listening to, or this is a topic of value. So that's knowledge. And as you see, as you move from data to information for intelligence, when you first get the data, it's raw stuff. You begin to organize it. You begin to summarize it. You begin to analyze, synthesize, and ultimately make decisions. And so then you have intelligence, and the intelligence is you gather intelligence and experiencing, understanding the intelligence over time. You have knowledge. So I wanted to provide that framework about what the knowledge pyramid was. And this is the typical, what we call the knowledge management cycle, the activities that are conducted by knowledge management professionals. The first one is capture and collect. You capture the information. It can be primary, it can be secondary, it can be proprietary within your organization, or it can be public. It could be analog, or more increasingly, it could be digital. So this is how we capture it. And this capture and collect refers to the pyramid before. This is your data. Then you begin to organize and enrich it. This is where it becomes information. You begin to put it in some fashion that it begins to make sense, that people can ultimately access it. And then you analyze it. That's where, the top of the pyramid, the intelligence, that's where you now have the intelligence. So you first capture it, you organize, enrich it. You, through taxonomy, you classify various documents or such to make it easier to access. And then you analyze it. An important piece is also storing that information and then using, retrieving, or distributing it. Again, the information is only as good as your ability to access it when you need it. So capturing and making sense about, organizing and making sense about it is extremely valuable, but ultimately it has to be available to you as just-in-time intelligence when you need it. Then you update the information, and the whole cycle starts again, because you're continuously collecting, organizing, analyzing the information and making it available. Now, how did big data impact this, looking back to 2011 to now? Well, big data changed the scale, the scope, and complexity of the work, but it didn't fundamentally change these 6 steps. But these steps had to adapt. For example, to capture and collect, there was just now simply more information out there. And I'll give 2 data points to show this. They said that in 2021, 1.7 megabytes of data were created for every person on Earth every second. With conservatively 8 billion people on Earth, that's 13 billion megabytes of data created every second. Put another way, in the time it took me to explain that, about 150 billion megabytes of data were created around the world. You know, when I was in college, I had my laptop Apple Macintosh computer, and it had a 20 megabyte hard drive. And I thought that was all I would ever need. I could put all my papers on it. I was very popular. I could put games on it, so my friends would want to come over and play games on it. But as you think about the evolution from that time, we went to megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes, exabytes, zettabytes, yottabytes, zenatabytes, shalentnobytes, and something now called domigemmagrammabytes, which is 1 with 33 zeros after it. we seem to be inventing words just to capture the bigness of this, the data that's out there. So capture and collect, we're going to talk about a bit later, and the importance of making sure that you're focused when you capture and collect. Second is organizing and enriching. You know, my daughter, young daughter would often ask, Daddy, you know, what do you do? What is knowledge management? I would try to explain to her, and she'd sort of roll her eyes and say, yeah, you know, thanks. But what I learned finally was I said, think about a library. You go into a library, you ask the librarian for a travel book. They don't just say, it's back there. No, there is a system where it's organized, where she can say, oh, you want a travel book? It's organized by, let's say, the Dewey Decimal System. You go to the back, turn right, the 9/11 section, that's where you'll find travel books. So I explained that's what I do. And with big data, it's a different, you know, when you have a library with 10 books in it, you don't need to be as organized as when you have a library with 100,000 or 1 million books in it. Then you need to really organize and have a structured classification system in place. Analysis too. You know, there's tools out there where you can do desktop analysis now. They say you look at your phone. They say there is more computing power on your phone now than all the computers that were in the NASA headquarters when they first put the man on the moon. Just incredible analytic power at your desk. And there's many tools out there, Alteryx, Apache, Hadoop, many tools out there to help you analyze the environment. Storage, obviously, if you're storing vast amounts of data, you need to have the right data warehousing, the right architecture in place. Use, retrieve, and distribute. Again, the more there is, the more important it is that you have a good system in place to make it easy for people to search and pull the information they need. And then updating. And so how has knowledge management really flexed to adapt to this digital transformation? Well, in a number of areas. Taxonomy development. Again, taxonomy is a classification system. And again, if you have 10 books in a library, you can be a little sloppy with how you're organizing. If you have 1 million books, you know, you need to break fiction, nonfiction, break it down into time periods, specific types. So you need a very rigorous taxonomy to help organize all your data. Auto categorization. Now you have tools that can sort through your documents and pick out key points so they can categorize, you know, what the paper's about, what the key themes are, and make it easy for you to search on that. Augmented analytic platforms. Again, there's desktop tools at your fingertips to allow you to do the analysis. You know, sometimes with data that's so big, and we define big data as unable to analyze with traditional tools. You can't just show someone 10,000 lines of data and say, see, look at this point. You need to graph, you need to chart, you need to provide some visual. You know, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, in my view, an infographic is worth 1,000 pictures. You need to be able to tell the story, not just by showing the numbers, but by using graphics and charts. And one of the huge advantages of big data and now the tools which are available to knowledge management professionals is it allows you to look at unstructured data as well as structured data. And this is important because previously structured data, you know, data that appeared in databases could be easily found and moved and manipulated, was all you could analyze. But now unstructured data like emails, voicemails, video images, you can now begin to search and analyze using various tools. So let's now spend a few minutes talking about what some of the knowledge management challenges are. Now that we have an understanding, or at least my view, and I'm happy to discuss during the Q&A if people have different views about knowledge management. But now let's turn to what are some of the challenges. Look, managing knowledge is complex, and it's more complex as technology develops, as data becomes more readily available. But I want to break this down into 4 key areas. The first is about people in organization. Organization, one of the biggest challenges in KM is the what I call knowledge leakage. That's knowledge leaving the organization. They say that in your lifetime, you'll have 8 to 10 jobs. For millennials, it'll be 12 to 15 jobs in their lifetime. And what happens is that a lot of organizations, someone joins and you spend a great deal of time training them. And just when they're productive enough to contribute to the organization because they understand your organizational way, they understand the tools, they understand the processes, they leave. And that knowledge walks out the door. So capturing that knowledge, and I'll spend some time talking about the knowledge that they have that's here in the B drive in their brains, and trying to figure out how to get it on the C drive, the common drive, the shared drive, where everyone can use it. Because if it's locked in here, only one person can use that data, that information, that intelligence. But when you begin to share it, it then becomes an asset for the organization. You know, there aren't really many incentives in place for knowledge sharing. Knowledge remains a source of individual power. You know, when I first started in knowledge management, the way we got people to share knowledge was in essence by bribing them. We used to have each month, we would give a $10, $20 gift certificate to the person who was the best contributor to the knowledge, the person who shared knowledge. But we learned over time that sometimes budgets go away, so you don't have the money to give out each month, even if it was a small amount. And B, when people start sharing and giving, they begin to think, well, I'm providing something more valuable. I should get more money for it. So in that respect, you know, to incent people for knowledge sharing using money hasn't really worked. Rather, I think it's recognition and visibility. And I'll give an example. I had the privilege, along with some of my colleagues, of working in the kingdom at KA Care, the King Abdul City for Atomic and Renewable Energy. And we were working, and one of the issues that came up was, how do you create an incentive program? And what we realized was that, you know, we needed to think within the context of Saudi Arabia, within the context of KA Care. And what we found was that what really incented people were pictures with the head, His Excellency, the head of KA Care, or an individual note from His Excellency, something they could put on their walls or something they could show to colleagues. In other cases where we've thought about incentives, we've tried something that's become popular recently, gamification. And this is the idea that people are inherently competitive. And so what we would do is we would create a knowledge sharing leaderboard and show the people who were sharing knowledge. And those people who were 2, 3, 4, or 5 looked in and said, boy, I want to be number 1. I want to share more knowledge. Now you have to guard against people just sharing to get on top of the list versus quality. So that's an issue. But we found that competitive nature, establishing that leaderboard, what they call league tables, creating those league tables was a great source of getting people to share information. And you know, at other organizations, we found similar. We needed to think about the culture and think about how that organization operated and really what motivated the people. So incentives is a very local issue that needs to be resolved. And too often people think that the old thinking, if I tell you what I know, what's my value to the organization? And knowledge management needs to change that thinking so that people realize their value to the organization is as a transmission belt. It's about getting information to the people, again, when they need it and how they need it. So knowledge is a source of power, but your individual source of power is your ability to pass that information on so that others can use it. And then finally, tacit knowledge going largely unexploited. You know, we've talked a bit about this, and I'll talk about it a bit later, and it's so important because that knowledge up here on the B drive, they estimate 60% of the knowledge within an organization resides here. So it's absolutely essential to get it off the B drive. Second category, processes and decision making. You know, when I started in knowledge management, they said the most important thing is you're a silo buster. You're breaking down barriers between people and between groups so they can communicate. But collaboration is still difficult, and it's even more difficult now with people working largely remotely. Some of it can be organizational. Like I started my career in the U.S. intelligence community, military intelligence, where everybody felt that their piece of information need to be protected from others. It could be cultural. Had the opportunity to work in Japan, where people, as a general rule, aren't as forthright in sharing until you really get to know them. And then there's technical barriers to sharing. And this to me is the biggest challenge, because you see the knowledge, there's no reason why it shouldn't be shared, except it sits on one platform or it sits in one area and the two don't talk to one another. So knowledge management, one of the challenges is getting people to collaborate, to talk to one another. And this flows into the second point. Knowledge expertise is unavailable when needed. We generally think of knowledge management as P to C, putting people in touch with content. But knowledge management is also about P to P, putting people in touch with people, because those people have that tacit knowledge. So putting you in touch with people unlocks a great deal of knowledge. And I've seen, and I think one of the key things that knowledge management organizations do is create expertise locators within the organization. Now, a lot of times I've seen very simply where their expertise is based off simply what their current position is. If they're currently, a financial analyst, then, their expertise would be listed as such. More sophisticated are able to pull from HR databases. Perhaps when the person applied, you could look through their resume and see what they did and what their expertise is. Even more sophisticated ones pull from social media, like LinkedIn, to see what people are saying and what their previous expertise is. And then the most sophisticated systems, and it's one that I've worked with at the World Bank, they have an expertise location system where it pulls in all that information, but it has an added layer of input, crowdsourcing, so that you could claim or see that a person's an expert, but then people who've worked with that person are allowed to comment and say, yes, Abdul Rahman is highly knowledgeable. I worked with him on this project. So it's about layering on that crowdsourcing and that extra level of input. So there's various layers as you think about accessing expertise. The value in ROI, return on investment of knowledge, is not well understood. Hey, if we worked in sales, it would be simple. At the end of the year, you say, what was your sales? That's up 10%, it's down 5%, and you can easily see what the value to the organization. But, knowledge management is like oxygen. You don't really realize it until it's not there. You only realize it when you can't access something or don't have something available. And what I've done in knowledge management is every project I've been on, I've sat down before, started and talked with the person who requested and said, well, what would make success for you? What is considered highly successful? And we go through some metrics. And then when we're done, I now have at the end, I asked, were we highly successful? Were we successful? Were we somewhat successful? Were we not successful? And they would say, hopefully highly successful. And this would allow me at the end of the year to say, I had 23 projects and 20 of them were highly successful. 3 were successful. And then people would ask, well, what constitutes highly successful? And I would go back and say, well, it was defined as, and you have your answer there. So there's various ways to show it, but it's not, you need to work at it to show the value of the return on investment. Data and content. The third area, keeping data clean and consistent. If you have clean, consistent data, you can analyze it. But the problem is, you need a governance structure and a commitment from people to really make that work. And I'll give you an example. There's a database I work with, and you have to enter dates in it. And it's supposed to be entered day, month, year. So April 5th would be 04/05/21. But if you live in Europe, you're used to putting the month first. So, is it May 4th or is it April 5th? Getting that data consistent is critical. And you need someone who, it's great to say you need to put it in, and this is the way you do it. But then you need that governance and accountability in place to make sure that it's put in, so you have standardization. Validated sources and developing a single source of truth. Well, you want people to go to your database or the official source of truth. You don't want to have cases, which is so often prevalent, where they have some data on their desktop or they've downloaded some data and then they've changed it over time. So you get not a single source of truth, but multiple sources of truth. And this is where you run into trouble. If you want clean and consistent data so you can perform analysis, you want that single source of truth. And validating the sources is a challenge. You have more and more sources out there. As you see on the last bullet, the amount of data is exploding. New content, new sources are appearing every day. But one thing we have learned to do as knowledge management professionals is to analyze the data, analyze the sources. Where is it coming from? Is this still a valid source that we can trust? And so in the data and content area, with the explosion of data and content, managing, as you see in the center, just becomes more and more complex. Finally, I want to talk about technology. So often as a consultant, I have gone into a company and they said, oh, we're open to whatever technology you want, as long as it's SharePoint, or as long as it's Oracle, or as long as it's part of Microsoft suite, because they see technology as a solution, not a strategic enabler. And for knowledge management, we recognize that you start with business requirements, you start with technical requirements, and you build your case. And once you build your case, then you decide what technology is going to allow you to best solve for the problems at hand. But too often people are seduced. They love the technology, and they want to use a particular technology. Now, I certainly understand some organizations have software and hardware in place. You have to use that. But it often goes beyond that, and that they want you to choose a technology and then tell you sort of what the technology is that you need to choose. So a good deal of my time as a knowledge management professional is spent explaining to people that technology is your strategic enabler, not your solution. Keeping up with technology changes. There's two critical elements here. Technology is always evolving. I would argue that technology is evolving quicker and quicker now, but that's always been a challenge. The bigger challenge, which many people don't recognize, is the rate of adoption of technology. And I'll give two examples. If we played a word association game and I said to you, drone, 5 years ago, you would have probably said military strike, because that's where drones usually were, used by militaries to remotely strike against adversaries. However, if I said to you today, drone, you're just as easy to say Amazon, because Amazon, at least in the United States, now delivers products by drone. I'll give another example. On January 1st, 1914, the first commercial flight took place. 23 miles, 21 minutes, 6 people. It took place in Florida over a lake. It took 68 years to 1982 for the airline industry to have 50 million viewers. or 50 million users, 50 million trips. Compare this to July 6th, 2016. Pokemon Go, an augmented reality game, was introduced. It took 19 days to get 50 million users. The airlines took 82 years for 50 million users. This augmented reality tool, it took 19 days. So it's not only the technology is changing rapidly, it's about adoption of technology is changing rapidly. And with that is the expectations. Managing expectations is so critical. People want their information on their desktop. They want it on their laptop. They want it on their phone. In some cases, Google Glasses, they want it on their glasses. And the expectation is, I want my intelligence anytime, anywhere, anyway. And you need knowledge management needs to build for this. So for example, when I was recently building a site, I need to make sure it was mobile enabled. I need to make sure that the pictures rendered when people looked at, or the visuals rendered when people looked at it on different screens, from small phone screens to large projection screens. So these are some of the key challenges which I think we are seeing a need to address. And it's important to remember, knowledge management is a journey. It's a continuous effort. These are the five levels of growth within knowledge management. And now immediately you'll look at this and say, oh great, how long does it take me to get from level 1 to level 5? Well, there's two answers. First, you might not many people go to level 4 and level 5. Level 3 is when a knowledge management is standardized within organizations. And so many people are looking just to get to level 3. And second, moving from level to level depends on your culture, your organization's appetite for change. But it starts with the growing awareness. Level 1, the need for knowledge management. So when we worked at KA Care, as you read through the RFP, they basically said, we have knowledge management practices, but they were built for people when there were 10, 15 people. They were somewhat loose and fluid. Now we have 250 people. We have to be a little more structured about how we manage our knowledge across the organization. So the first level is the growing awareness. Second is the growing involvement. You sort of do pilot tests showing how knowledge management works. And at first people look at the results and say, oh, that's great, but it doesn't really relate to me. But over time, as you do all sorts of different pilots, eventually people begin to see this is exactly how it relates to me. And so you get growing involvement and excitement. At level 3, you finally, you put the processes and procedures and approaches in place that allow they allow the systems to work and make sense. And you begin sort of achieving results at scale because you're putting in place processes across the whole organization. And then levels 4 and 5 are about further building knowledge management and evolution of knowledge management into the DNA, into the fabric of the organization. So the point here is knowledge management is a continuous journey. From initiate to develop to standardize to optimize, at level 4 where you're tweaking the knowledge management, to level 5 where you just have a system in place that's constantly improving your practices. And again, many companies don't even have a desire to go to 4 or 5. It's usually level 1 to level 3. And again, the timing changes depending on your particular organization, its culture, its people, its processes and frameworks in place. So good. Now let me turn to COVID-19, the case study. As I said earlier, it's probably not appropriate to say, but a good thing that has come out of COVID-19 is it's put the spotlight on knowledge management, and it's given us the opportunity to shine and make greater headway, make greater impression, build greater credibility within our organizations. Within any crisis, we have both danger as well as opportunity. This is the Chinese word for crisis, wei ji. And it's made up of two characters. The first character, wei, roughly translates as danger. The second character, ji, is opportunity. So the Chinese recognize that when talking about crisis, there is both danger as well as opportunity. And from a Western sense, Albert Einstein said, look, in every crisis, there's great opportunity. Looking just at COVID, prior to COVID, the quickest a global vaccine rollout was for mumps, and that took 4 years. Yet during this crisis, we were able to come out with a vaccine in less than a year. That's because of the great technology, the collaboration, the crowdsourcing, the cooperation. All of that worked together to show it was an opportunity for the global medical community to come together to solve a problem. So the danger, the crisis, obviously, and the danger was the pandemic, but the opportunity here was, innovation. A couple other examples I can give in February of 2014. In the UK, there was a tube strike. The subways were closed for 2 days. People had to find alternate modes of transportation. People's commuting patterns were changed. Just simply going to buy food or conduct any of the necessities of daily life were changed. The strike ended in 2 days. But what was interesting is fully 20% of the people, the way that they traveled changed. They didn't go back to their old patterns. So, this 2-day crisis led to behavior change. Another example on a much broader scale is government policy shift. In 2011, tsunami hit Fukushima, Japan, knocking out 4 of 6 reactors and sending a radioactive plume of smoke into the sky. Angela Merkel, the chancellor in Germany, saw this and said, this is too dangerous, this nuclear energy. We're going to stop our nuclear energy program. She immediately closed 8 nuclear power plants and committed by the end of the end of this year or next year to move the country off reliance on nuclear energy and close all its plants. And that's being accomplished. So out of this crisis, it can lead to policy change. So there's a number, there's many examples of opportunities that come out of crisis. But what I'd like to focus on here particularly is 3 areas. The growing importance of intelligence, capturing tacit knowledge, and the need for risk mitigation. That is, to better see into the future, to eliminate some of the risk associated with uncertainty. So there is a quote that I like to use now that I'm sure I did not invent, but I have not seen anybody else who's used it, so I can't attribute it. So I will take it as my own. And that is, the first casualty in any crisis is clarity. If you think about the COVID-19 pandemic, it's changed our political, economic, social, cultural, legal, regulatory, technological, environmental environments. And people are, throw up their hands and say, I need clarity. Well, this is what knowledge management provides by providing that intelligence, not just data and information, which is stopped just to confuse the matter, because there's plenty of it out there, but the intelligence that people can use. And so people during this crisis are looking for insights, actionable insights. And that's exactly what knowledge management provides. They provide that actionable intelligence, the decision support, predictive analytics that help either make decisions or help with planning. And that's what senior people in organizations need. They need to manage this chaos to better understand what is going on and how, what their next move is with so many things uncertain. And so what I've done, one thing to do is to create a series of products and services to help with this, from the very quick hit alerts. This is what's happening. This is what you need to know. This is what's changing. to more lengthy thought pieces, trend pieces about, bigger picture, like what will the environment return to work look like? What does it mean for us? I've been talking with people in the transportation industry, and now with COVID, will the transportation industry ever return? Buses, will people ever return to taking those buses? And so thinking about larger picture issues like that, monitoring the landscape and, conducting data analysis. So this is, again, it's an opportunity for us to shine by showing the intelligence. Capturing tacit knowledge. This, we talked about earlier, is so critical to organizations, especially if 50%, 60% of their information is tacit knowledge. I will tell a story when I was hired as the first head of knowledge at Rockefeller Foundation in New York City. The first day I went into the then president, my boss's office, Judith Roden, and said, "What are my success metrics?" She looked at me and said, "You have to make sure that Gary does not retire." Gary had been there 45 years. He was the institutional memory of the organization. I said, "Fine, I will interview him. We will, I'll ask him about some of the processes, where he stores his key information, who are some of his key contacts, what frameworks, how does he think about certain problems?" She's like, "That's great. Exactly. Just what I need." So when do you want to conduct that interview? Maybe 2-3 weeks before he retires. And I looked her in the eye and I said, "No, it needs to occur at orientation." And she looked at me quizzically and said, what do you mean?" And I said, "Think about going to the dentist. If you're going to the dentist, you don't wait to the night before to brush your teeth and you brush them for 1 hour and hopefully you're going to get a clean bill of health. No, you brush your teeth every day. That's a good practice. So too is a dental hygiene, is good data hygiene. What's on the B drive, you can't just download 45 years, in an interview, in a 1 hour interview. The idea is people need to understand that the information up here, first, that they have information up here that's valuable, and then provide them with the tools to download that information. So at the Rockefeller Foundation, for example, we based our work on projects. And so what I put in place was reflection sessions. At discrete times during projects, I would stop, the project would stop, and you would have a session where you asked, and people could freely speak, what's going right? What's going wrong? What do we need to do differently? If you could hit the reset button and start again, what would you do? And in this way, people's ideas, their thinking about the projects, they were able to communicate those, and we'd have note takers and they would copy those down. Because typically what would happen is you would do that when a project is done. But if you do it when the project's done, it'll help with all the next projects, but it won't help for this project. But in this way, people could learn, and we'd capture that information. You see at the bottom, awareness, make them aware of it, to share the information, and then memorialize it, capture it, and put it in a place where people could use it so people could learn right away. Now, this worked at the Rockefeller Foundation, and it was great. But, and it might work at another, like the Ford Foundation and other NGO. But what works at the Ford Foundation won't necessarily work at Ford Motors or work at KA Care. So you need to develop the product, this approach, this life cycle approach based on your organization. But the bottom line is it needs to be done consistently, regularly, and you need that leadership support. You need communications about that, because people will forget what's up here is as valuable as what's on the paper, and you need to have the two working together. Finally, strategic foresight. Napoleon lost his fair share of battles, but for him that was okay. It was about never being surprised, and that's what the strategic foresight. In this day and age, it's so much easier to be surprised because so many things are happening, and so many things happening so rapidly that you might miss them. So knowledge management can help here. It's about creating an early warning system. And early warning is based on the concept of getting information validated as quick as possible, but letting the decision maker know about it far enough out that they can actually do something about it. For example, if I work at Samsung and I come in and say, Apple's releasing a new iPhone, it has this, this, and this capability, we need to do something about it. Your boss might say, great, let's go to the tech people and talk about them. When's it coming out? They're announcing it after business today. Well, that's no strategic lead time. That doesn't allow you to make any decisions. And so it's about pushing the decisions out, being certain of the information further out. And you can put in place early warning systems based off your data. And we can talk in the question and answer about strategic planning, scenario planning, wargaming. But what it does is it pushes the event horizon further out so you can make a decision earlier because you have better information, because you have a framework for thinking about the future. So instead of knowing the day of, maybe you know 3 months before. So that's the true value of the early warning system. And more companies are putting this in because there's greater and greater uncertainty. It's a direct correlation between the two. So in the last couple minutes, I wanted to conclude with my knowledge management roadmap, looking at 2022 and beyond. And I think there's 4 things here that I'd like to talk about. Data discipline, thinking about the data and what data to use. Promoting data democracy, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Identifying the right skills. And finally, in this day and age, it's about thinking differently. So what about data discipline? You know, too many companies think, well, I'll collect everything and then we'll make sense about it. And that's because data storage is so cheap. You know, it used to be expensive. Now it's so cheap. We'll just collect everything, collect all this stuff, and we'll make sense about it. Well, that doesn't work. You need the data discipline to think, because bad data or too much data goes into the system. You can architect a system, but you're just going to make bad decisions quicker. So it's about putting the right data in to get the good decision. And that starts at the end. What are you looking to achieve? What are you looking to accomplish? And then you work your way backwards and say, okay, we need to collect this data, as opposed to, I think this is important. Let's collect this. Let's collect this. And let's attempt to analyze it and see what patterns or what insights we can get from it. So it's about taking your internal data, the external data, and wrapping the analytics to really come out with important insights. So it's so important, and this is so lost. I mean, I've had people come to me, organizations, and say, I want to do this. Is it too early to take? Is it too late to get involved in this? And they said, no. The question is it's too early? Is your company, is your organization set to think about the right data? Or you're just going to collect everything? You have, again, the technology. You have this technological tool in place, or you have it on people's desk, the business analytic tools, so you can crunch the data, but you don't have the right data. And so I walk them through and think about, you need a data discipline. And who better to think about it than knowledge management? I would argue this goes hand in glove, probably working with your IT. But at its core, data discipline is thinking about collecting the right data, whereas IT is more about processing the data. So data discipline is extremely important. Data democracy. Traditional organizations are designed, and I'll give an example when I was in the military. The general tells the colonel, tells the major, tells the captain, and it eventually comes down to me. I make a decision and it goes back up, captain, major, colonel, general. That's traditionally how organizations are designed. The decision-making is at the top. The people there have more experience and therefore better decision makers. But I would argue that in this era of data and, the knowledge management's work with data analysis and understanding, that what you really need is a flatter decision-making organization. You need to empower the people who are looking at the data and analyzing the data to make the decisions. What's a perfect example of this? Perfect example of this is a call center. Your computer doesn't work. You call in, they troubleshoot. They don't say, hold on a second, let me get this approved and come back a few minutes later. They might say, I can't handle it, and they escalate it. But the point is they try and solve it at the lowest possible level. So the decision-making is distributed. Because when you think about it, you know, in the US, we had this game of telephone where you would hear something and you would whisper in somebody's ear. It would go around the table and by the time it came back to you, it was nowhere near what you said because people interpreted and heard it differently. Well, the same is true with decision-making. You know, you have access to the data. You understand the data better. But then you have to present it to your boss, who presents it to his boss, who presents it to the ultimate boss, who ultimately is going to make the decision. But he's not really the expert. So I understand that this is difficult from an organizational standpoint, but the decision-making should be flattened out. And decisions should be made by the people looking at the data, collecting the data, and analyzing the data, as opposed to just someone who has a more senior position in a traditional organizational structure. So data democracy is the idea of pushing down decision-making to the lowest level where the people who understand the data best sit and can make the best decisions. And make no mistake about it, this involves a new skill set. You know, you want data cleansing, you want data warehousing. You need people with specific skills of data engineer. You remember the circle we put up earlier. You know, circle, the fourth step was the storage. Well, you know, making sure it's clean, making sure ETL, extraction, transformation, and load, making sure you can pull that information out when you need it requires a specific skill set. You know, if you want data visualization, you need people with the visual skill set. You need people, you know, as data gets bigger and bigger, you don't analyze data elements, you analyze data sets. Analyzing data sets requires data modeling. You need data modelers to help. So it's about recognizing that you're not doing more of the same, just at a higher level. It's fundamentally different. The landscape's changing constantly. We talked about new technology, new rates of adoption. You know, we're moving towards exascale computing, which is 1 million computations per second. You know, as that happens, greater and greater capability. You need people who can address that issue. So data engineers, graphic designers, people with communication skills, machine learning, AI skills. These are all new skills. So it's about making sure you're skilled right is an absolutely essential piece as well. And the final point I'd like to make before closing is you need to think differently. In 2004, there was an IPO document that came out. It was written by a couple of unknowns, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, the founders of Google. And they wrote their IPO, their initial public offering. And in it, they said, you know, our people spend 10% of their time working on things other than their core work. Now, management consultants around the globe and management gurus around the globe threw up their hands and said, that's ridiculous. You're only getting 90% efficiency from them. But what we've seen with Google is Google AdSense, Gmail, Google Earth, Google Maps, all came out of people spending that 10% time thinking about different projects. So, you know, with Google, they were ahead of their time. They were thinking differently. They were able to raise questions. You can now ask questions that you couldn't ask before because you didn't know the answer. The answer was, you know, asking about, well, what do people think about this? Well, the answer was in their emails. It was answer in their social media posts. And you couldn't analyze that previously. Now you can. So you can raise new questions. New patterns can be uncovered. You know, again, I talked about how the phone now has so much power on it. The desktop tools, Alteryx, other tools that are used, business intelligence and analytic tools allow you to uncover patterns. Correlations can be observed. Now, I offer one warning here about correlations. With so much data, they say that there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. You need to be careful with data and understand the difference between correlation and causation, because there's many examples where things are correlated that, but that doesn't mean that there's a causation there. So, for example, the classic one that we hear about in the United States is if you look at the cost of a subway ride in New York City, you look at the slope of that over time, and you look at the cost of a slice of pizza in New York City, the cost of that, they correlate exactly. They look like the exact same curve. But that doesn't mean that, every time the pizza price goes up, that that impact people then say, okay, we need to raise the cost of a subway ride. No, they just happen to be correlated. And there's many other examples of that. And so false correlations, as you see more and more data, you hear about false positives, and you need experts who can see this and hypothesis test to see, is this really a causation? Is this or a correlation? Some insights can be gained, new insights are gained and problems are solved, but it's about thinking differently. I will close with one story. When I worked for the US government, I used to head the long-range strategic planning. And we did, I handled or headed all the war gaming for the US Army and worked with all the other departments on kind of global war gaming. And there were two groups of people that I always made sure I had at the war games. I made sure I had science fiction writers, and I made sure I had academics, because they could think outside the box. And that's really what you need. As you think about knowledge management and innovation and thinking differently, it's about connecting dots in new ways. And what knowledge management does is put the dots out there, kind of make it wider, put more dots out there, and provide some guidance how to connect it. But it's ultimately others that are connecting dots in new and unique ways. So knowledge management is, in this new era, thinking differently. What new dots need to be there? How can we put more dots out there for people to analyze and look at? So I've spoken for about an hour or so, covering knowledge management in the digital age. Hopefully it's given you some food for thought. So let me turn it now back to Dr. Mitwali, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Scott, so much. Actually, we do appreciate this valuable and informative presentation, as I used to have you in different contexts, and you always give this impressive and outstanding presenting for the issue that you said. And as I used to say, Naseej, webinar, the most successful webinar is the one that stimulates and creates questions and inquiry more than gives answers and solution. And I think this is exactly what you did perfectly, Scott, in your distinguished presentation, which most I think of that indeed from the comments that I can see that appreciated the examples and the business case and case studies you provided, as much as the main content you presented. So thank you again, Scott. And now let's move to the question, and I invite all the attendees just to write down their question. And we already have some of them, and I think the one that started with the pyramid that you presented, and the question is in Arabic, so also the one that need to write down the question in Arabic, I will be welcome to translate it to Mr. Scott. So the pyramid that you presented, it looks different from the one that we used to have, which is starting at the bottom from the data, then information, then knowledge, and then the wisdom at the top. So could you just explain more why the pyramid that you presented just looks different?
So why the pyramid was different? Yes, I mean, look, there's been, like anything else, thinking changes. And, in this day and age, again, with all the information that's out there, I see just incredibly that too many people are, that we're awash in, we're data rich, but intelligence poor. I mean, that's what, in essence, organizations find themselves. And so we need to think about, kind of the difference between data and intelligence. And really, it goes back to the idea, I put that framework up as a lead into the discussion about data discipline, because it's really about capturing, making sure that what you're capturing makes sense, and understanding that you just, what's the difference if it's just a piece of information? That doesn't help unless it helps with the decision making. So it's really, as you think about the pyramid, just think about it as, more and more moving towards the decision-making process, because that's what ultimately your value to the organization, in a nutshell, is about providing decision support, whether it's to make a decision or to do planning. And so ultimately that's what you're moving towards, and making sure that you're providing that that is, that pyramid is a way of always thinking and looking and say, that's just data. That's not helping at all. I need to contextualize that, or I need to analyze that, or I need to organize that or synthesize that in a way. Again, the example I gave was, you pass on 37, numbers, 37 million, but it's a lot better if it's in the context of $37 million acquisition. And then suddenly you say, now I understand what it means. So it's about keeping people in knowledge management, recognizing that it's all about helping with decision making. It's not just organizing data. It's about organizing in a way that people can use it in its most valuable fashion and form.
Thank you so much. Here we have another question. I think it's the old and renewable question. How could the people convince the people just to share knowledge without being afraid of losing the power or losing their position in the organization? I like this question. It's old, but I need.
Yeah. So again, the old thinking is that you're losing power, but again, it's really about your value isn't what you know, because if you don't share what you know, yes, you're the only one who knows it, but knowledge hoarding in this day and age does not does not benefit the organization. And the way to show it really is doing the proof of concepts or the pilots to show how the first thing you do in an organization is find who your champions are, who believes in knowledge sharing. And then you create a pilot that demonstrates the success of knowledge sharing and shows how knowledge sharing accomplishes so much more than the knowledge hoarding or keeping it to yourself. Then once you develop that pilot and the success, it's a lot about communication, showing the organization that, look, we were able, so for example, this team worked together to win this business. Now people need to understand how they work together and win the business. Everybody needs to understand. Then you have another example where people working together developed a technology that makes you more efficient. So now you build up a series of winning case studies, stories, and then eventually when there's enough stories, people are convinced, people begin to see, the value is of sharing. This is where, the value is in team playing. This is how the organization grows, because that's, whenever you have your reviews, it's always about what are you doing for, what are you doing to promote, how are you growing the organization, how are you supporting the organization. And so with those case studies, you're building that case. And look, I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying everybody gets it right away, but that is the path, building those pilots, building the winning stories. In some of the companies we've worked for, we've built sites that have those success stories, and so people can see them. We have to get leadership. A key piece of it is organizations recognize when leaders are just talking versus leaders are just acting. And I'll use an example from the Rockefeller Foundation. We wanted to put in place a program that when people travel, after they travel, they write before they are reimbursed, they have to write a report saying, who they met with, what the value was and such.
Office report.
Yes, and yes, a trip report, an after action report, a visit report. And what we did was we made sure that when we did this, The first person who did it was the president of the organization. And we then showed that when she went on her trip and wrote her notes, here's where those notes appear. Here's how you can use them. She met with X, Y, and Z from these organizations. And other people were like, oh, wow, I work with those organizations. I can now say, I know your president met, you know, we met with your president, our president met with your senior leadership, we did this. And so people began to see, now I see the value of doing this. But it was with, you need that senior leadership, the buy-in and the actual actions. They need to not just talk about good behavior, but demonstrate. That's the key, demonstrating the positive behavior. And that's how you end up with success.
Perfect. So top managers should be the role model and the model for the other staff, just to follow their steps. And add, well, as you said, I think, Scott, rewarding the teamwork outcomes, not just focusing on the one-man show outcomes, I guess.
Right.
Perfect. So we have a question here about, I think this relates to what you said. It's about creating knowledge management culture is a big challenge. In your opinion, what is the best way you advise the organization to take and embedded this culture in the B drive? He quote your term, the B drive, in the organization people. I think he need some techniques, some methods to create the knowledge management culture within the organization.
Well, I guess the advantage is everybody sees the statistics. You see that people are leaving the organization. You know that all that information is exiting the organization. I think the quickest step, you know, I mentioned that you need to put in a life cycle approach, but the first step is to, there's three steps. The first step is to just, during the exit interview, and, you know, you always have an exit interview, usually HR, you know, or, you know, turn in your computer, turn in your badge, you know, go through paperwork to leave the organization. Well, when that occurs, knowledge management should just piggyback on that. And you should set up exit interviews where you talk about people, you know, what was, you know, what did you find most useful? What processes, what procedures, you know, who are your key contacts? Where did you see frameworks working, not working? But most importantly, and this happened at the Rockefeller Foundation, I started to doing, it was simply, where do you store your stuff? And the problem was, you're supposed to store it on common drives, but they're like, oh no, you know, I would work from home. I'm storing it on my computer. Well, can you please make a copy of that to make it available? And that alone was a huge win, because you were able to capture some information that, again, was just walking out the door. So the first step is, and I'm happy to share, I have a paper I put together on sort of this exit interview. I'm happy to share it with the group about things to do. The next step is to get people during orientation. You know, during orientation, you learn about the technology, you learn about the organization. Make sure that knowledge management has, you know, a 30-minute or an hour slot at the beginning. And during that, you tell them the value of sharing knowledge, the value of collaboration. You tell them about the, you know, the importance of the B drive information, talking with your colleagues, capturing that somehow. And that way, and then so that way you've bookended it. You've at least got the new people coming in who understand it, and you're capturing the knowledge on the way out. Now that you've bookended it, then you work from the middle to develop projects or programs like the reflection sessions, after action reports, other type of what we call water cooler sessions where you collect that. So it's really for organizations a three-step approach. The first two steps are what I call low-hanging fruit: the exit interview and orientation, because they're already in place. The structure's in place for that. You're just piggybacking on it. The tough piece is in the middle. But once you can sort of establish the value, especially at the exit interview, and I gave the example of, oh yeah, I store all my stuff on my hard drive. You know, I brought that to the attention that people are like, this is great. We didn't know what that was. Nobody else could access this. This is great. you start to see the value, and you then have the advantage then and support of going further and creating programs within the life cycle.
Thank you, Scott. Another question is related to how we can use knowledge management to convert the organization into learning organization.
How to convert it into a learning organization? Well, that's right. Again, we talked about sort of the idea of collaboration and sharing, and that's what I mean. Look, sharing is in essence learning. I mean, collaboration is by definition, I'm working with you, so you know what I know what you know. And so as you move the organization more towards collaboration, a natural byproduct of that is learning and learning sessions. Now, I always, with my knowledge management group, the idea is 100% transparency. This is what we do. This is how we do it. And so I try to model, much like I talked about the president at Rockefeller Foundation modeling. You want to model the good behavior. So it's about teaching, it's about teaching people and about what knowledge management is and in creating that transparency. And then, what happens then is people see that transparency and they say, oh, I'm curious about this. I'm curious about that. Or they see, the more that you're creating those dots, the more dots that are out there, the more they start asking about other dots. And so you're developing a culture first of curiosity. After you develop the culture of curiosity, then you become a learning culture. But you first have to create that transparency that leads to the curiosity. The curiosity in turn then leads to the learning culture.
Perfect. I think that we have two questions related to each other. The first one, how much the data in Google is reliable in terms of the percentage? He asked about estimation from your experience, because I think he's mentioning or pointing to Wikipedia and this not authenticated knowledge there.
Yeah. Well, see, here's the thing. When you think about Wikipedia is always, it's crowdsourced, but it's always very close to correct, but it's always 100% wrong because you always have people adding to it and editing it. So it's about, it's about what any good researcher, many of you out there, with librarian skills know about triangulation. You look at one source, you look at two sources, you look at any number of sources. How accurate it is, that's something you have to examine and determine over time. But in the case of Wikipedia, as I always say, it's always 100% wrong because somebody sees something, they say that's wrong, they change it, and then somebody else is changing it. Oh, we need to add this, add that. But it's always close, and it always gets better and better through crowdsourcing. And so I think the key is what, you're looking at, if I had to talk about reliability, it's the crowdsourced data and information that's the closest to reliable. But I would never, I have a daughter who's in 8th grade, and she was writing a report, and one of the rules was you can never quote Google, you can never quote the internet as as a source, because or if you do, you have to quote other sources as well, support at least 3 sources. And I think that the rule of 3 is a good approach, but the most reliable ones I find are the crowdsourced ones, because people are looking at and commenting on it and trying to keep it quote unquote honest, and they'll always be close. So I would use those first and then use others to validate. So validating sources is a big challenge, but knowledge management with its kind of professionals with the librarian skills and the data validation skills are probably best equipped in an organization to handle something like that.
I totally agree with you. Related to that, I think the next step that comes from this question, do we need to hire people especially to select the good data to have good decision for the institution?
Now, do we need to, well, again, this goes back to getting the right skill set we talked about and understanding. I'll give you an example. In 2011, Barack Obama announced the Big Data Initiative. It took till 2016 for the big data strategy to come out. And one of the key elements, there's the issue about security and such personal information. But one of the key elements that came out of it was, if you're looking at these data sets, you are doing a disservice if you don't have the right skills. And it was about building the right skills. So it starts with what you're looking at and what you're trying to accomplish. And then again, you build backwards and think about what type of people you need. I mean, if you're constantly writing reports for the board of directors trying to explain things, data elements and data sets, an investment in a data scientist, a data visualization specialist would make sense. If you're working more kind of on the R&D side, maybe looking at big data sets, you need a data modeler to really understand how the data needs to be captured, expressed, and analyzed. So that question is a good one, but it goes back to kind of what your core organization does, how they consume knowledge. That's always important. I mean, if it's, it's the power of the PowerPoint slide, the graphic illustrator, might be key. If it's done just, desk side discussions, that's a different skill set. So it comes down to the goals of the organization, the culture of the organization, and the operational processes of the organization.
Perfect. We have a question here related to the top management. How to convince the top management with the value of the knowledge management and digital transformation? Yeah. I think, and to convert, not just this one, and to convert this into action plan.
Yeah, so look, top management is only interested in two things: growth at the top line or shrinking the bottom line. So putting it in those terms, so for example, work I do now, helps support RFPs that win business. So if you win business, then going back to the group and saying, did this help support, did this help you win the business, and getting those testimonials or that proof of that, because that's what resonates: growth at the top line or reduction at the bottom line. So operational efficiency or revenue growth. That's what drives public, corporations and organizations. So putting it in those terms, understanding what the pain points are for the executives, understanding what their goals and objectives are is critical. And so, and then you frame the activities within that, within that framework. So again, if it's let me use another example. Yeah, it's a certain number of projects per year. You show how you supported those projects, or it's a certain revenue generated from that. Show how the fact that knowledge flowed to them. You were able to provide information to them when they needed it for the RFP. It allowed them to do that. Or maybe you're publishing documents. Show how your databases allowed them to quickly pull the information, retrieve the information. So again, it goes back to what are the core activities of your organization and what the pain points are of your senior leadership, and then from there building the cases based on that.
Now, because we're running out of the time, we will have a telegraphic answers and in a capsule way, which we can say. This question, yes. There are many positions related to the knowledge management, like knowledge management manager and knowledge management officer, workers. So can you differentiate between them, please?
Yeah, so first off, I like the term that organizations use now, I like the term they use now where you're kind of corporate lead for knowledge, because knowledge management is somewhat misleading. because it's not just the management of knowledge, it's knowledge creation. So I like anything that gets away from knowledge management, like knowledge officer. Titles like that show knowledge in a broader sense, because I mean, knowledge is really, in my view, in-house think tanks. So think about it, a think tank, you knowledge researcher, knowledge analyst, knowledge officer are all, I think, good titles, moving away from knowledge management. And they should be action oriented, because that's what knowledge really needs to be about and people need to see. Now, my other argument is the titles are somewhat irrelevant. It's what you do and how you do it. You can
description.
Right. It's about meeting the goals, and so decision support analyst would be a good. That doesn't even have the word knowledge in it, because it focuses on decision. It focuses on what you need, decision support, or something around a strategic analyst, because it focuses on strategy. So think about what your role is in the organization, and then title the positions based on the roles and what you want to accomplish. So forget about kind of traditional titles. Think about the titles that reflect what you want. If people just see the title, that conveys value.
Perfect. We have a double question. It's related to each other from the same attendee. Who should be involved in designing the organization knowledge management system, and how frequently this should be reviewed?
So, I mean, look, I think who should be involved in it, again, I hate to say it depends on the organization, but, look, if you're supporting R&D, then obviously you need R&D involved in it. I would say that any type of knowledge management structure, you think you first have to ask, who are the key stakeholders? That's the question you ask. Who's using the system and who most benefits from it? Those are the two questions you ask. Once you have the answer to those, you have the answer to who needs to be involved in the input, because if you are a key user of it, you want them involved in inputting and designing it, because they're the ones who are going to have to use it. I mean, too often I've seen examples where, consultants have designed elegant solutions, and the people using it says, well, this, I can't use this. It doesn't answer the questions I need. So you need that. You need the user input. You need that. And you need, and you also need senior leadership involved, because they're the ones who are going to give you the power and empower you to work within the organization if you have them supporting you. So you need at one level like an advisory group, and then you need that's how you think about an advisory group and a working group. The advisory group should be senior people that provide guidance. The working group should be those people who are going to be provide the input into the system, operate the system, or take advantage of the output of the system. That should be your working group, and that's how you should think about who you should get involved in developing any knowledge management system.
Perfect. Thank you. And because we are running out of time, we apologize for the flow of the question that comes from the attendee. The last question that it's about the future. So how do you see the future of the digital transformation in the region in the coming 5 to 10 years, whether on the strategy level or technology level?
Well, I think the big challenge in my view is, kind of the belief, the more and more the automation of, the processing of the data. Now, it's my firm belief that, you're never going to replace that last little bit, the analytic work. But, we talked about the fourth industrial revolution and how automation is developing. It's getting closer and closer to that level. Now, as the computers and as the technology evolves and it gets smarter and smarter, you're going to need people more and more to check that it's being done right. but I still see this as a great advantage to knowledge management, because knowledge management still needs to that last human piece at the end. And anything that you know, like auto categorization, anything that better categorizes and gets that information in a more usable form is valuable. But again, you know, as computers and machines, robots take over more and more of that work, you know, they need to learn. They need to learn from somebody. They need to be observed. Somebody needs to kind of double check and understand that the logic and such is right. So it's about following that flow, following what's going on. But the bottom line is, I embrace this technology, bringing it to that last bit, because it allows the knowledge management professional really to focus on the value add, turning it into something important. All the collection, the processing is, you know, all that stuff leads up to the end. But if you can get technology to do that, and we're a long way from that, and you need people to observe and make sure that it gets to that last little bit. So you need those people. But I welcome this, you know, the fourth industrial revolution and the continuing automation, bringing it to a much higher level of organization, so that it's easier for us to analyze, but we'll still have knowledge management will still have that final piece, that final role.
Thank you so much, Mr. Scott Leib, and I'm sure that all the attendees just enjoyed this very informative presentation, and we thank all the attendees for following our events and webinars in Naseej Academy. Also, I will not forget to thank Mr. Salah, the one he spent efforts in the simultaneous translation. Thank you. And for sure, I need to congratulate you and wish you a happy holidays as we get close to the holidays for you and for your family, Scott. And I will leave the last word for you as our honor guest. Please, Scott.
And I just wanted to say, I appreciate all the great questions. You see on this last slide, my email is there. I am also on LinkedIn. I am more than happy if I didn't answer your question or didn't answer it completely. I am more than happy to answer any questions. So please, either on LinkedIn or through my email listed here, please feel free to reach out. And with that, shukran, and thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it. And then to all out there, please enjoy this, be safe and enjoy the holidays. Thank you.
Thank you, Salah. Thank you. في أمان الله، نشكركم وتابعونا في الفعاليات التي نعدها في نسيج أكاديمية نسيج، ونترككم في رعاية الله، وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. Thank you. Bye bye, Scott.
Bye.